It was Christmas morning, crisp and quiet. When I stood on the porch of the house I co-signed, clutching a tin of homemade cookies in one hand and a wrapped gift for my grandson in the other. The house I helped secure, the one with my name on the mortgage papers. I was wearing the same ivory sweater my grandson, Noah, once said made me look like a snowflake. I thought he might smile if he saw it again. Instead, I was greeted by Harper, my daughter-in-law. She opened the door in a fleece robe, her face taut and expressionless, like she'd braced herself for this encounter. "You're not welcome here," she said, each word measured, rehearsed. Behind her, I heard the faint sound of wrapping paper and children's laughter. And then clearer. "Is that Grandma?" Harper shifted to block the doorway more completely. My heart thudded in my chest, but I didn't push. I didn't plead. I just looked her in the eye and gave a small smile. "Good luck with the mortgage," I said softly. And I walked away. That single sentence, so calm, so final, wasn't just the end of that Christmas. It was the beginning of something bigger. I parked across the street, partly to avoid blocking the driveway, but mostly because my gut had warned me I wouldn't be staying long. I already knew I wouldn't be invited in, but I came anyway. I was a mother. A grandmother. I brought cookies, a gift, and a dash of foolish hope. The wreath was still on the door. The same faux pine with red ribbon I'd helped Harper pick out 2 years ago when things were different. There was a blow-up Santa slouched on the lawn. One eye half deflated. The house looked festive on the outside, but the warmth inside had long since stopped including me. I rang the bell. I could hear Frosty the Snowman playing on the television and the rustle of gift wrap. For a moment I let myself believe I might hear my son, Paul, call out a welcome. But when the door opened, it was just Harper. Her hair was pulled back too tight. Her expression even tighter. "You're not welcome here," she said again. This time slower. Like a knife meant to cut deep. I swallowed. "I just wanted to drop these off." I held up the cookies in the box. Inside was a NASA Lego kit for Noah, something I knew he'd love. "Leave them on the step," she said flatly, already reaching to close the door. My hand gently stopped it from shutting. "Harper," I said, keeping my voice even. "My name is still on the mortgage." Her eyes flashed. "Which you've reminded us of at every family event for 5 years. That doesn't entitle you to barge in whenever you want. This is our home." I let the door go. "No," I said, still steady. "It's not. Not entirely." And then I gave her the smallest smile and said, "Good luck with the mortgage." Then I turned and walked to my car, the gift and cookies still in my hands. I didn't go straight home. I drove around, watching snow cling to rooftops and children wobble down sidewalks in oversized boots. I passed neighborhoods I hadn't visited in years, where other families were likely drinking cocoa and unwrapping gifts, unaware of the Cold Wars happening in homes like mine. By the time I reached my condo, the parking lot was nearly empty. Most of my neighbors had gone to spend the holiday with family. I climbed the stairs in silence, the tin heavier than it had been an hour ago. Inside, the scent of pine cleaner and leftover pot roast lingered. I set the cookies on the counter and placed Noah's unopened gift on the armchair. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there in the quiet, looking at the tin and the paper, and wondering when exactly the shift had happened. From welcome to unwanted. The framed photo from last Christmas still sat on the shelf. Noah frosting on his face, hugging my leg. My snowflake sweater visible beneath his little arms. I picked it up, straightened the frame, and reached for my phone. The daycare no longer included me on their update list. Harper had changed that. But I still had Noah's old tablet account saved in my contacts. I hit the call button. Straight to voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. My voice sounded far away. "It's Grandma. Just wanted to say Merry Christmas. I hope you're having fun this morning. I love you so much." I hung up before my throat could close. That evening, I poured half a glass of wine and opened the file cabinet in my spare room. I hadn't looked at the mortgage documents in years, but something inside me had shifted. I pulled the folder out, flipped to the refinance section, and froze. There, filed neatly between 2 bank statements, was a page I didn't recognize. A refinance document from last spring, with my name on it, and my signature. Only it wasn't mine. My signature slanted differently. The loop of the G was all wrong. My hand was shaking, But not from shock. From clarity. It was forged. Harper had faked my signature. I knew it with the certainty only a mother knows when something just isn't right. I pulled out my phone and texted Claudia, my best friend for 40 years and a retired notary who'd watched me sign the original mortgage. You home tomorrow morning? Need you to look at something. She responded in under a minute. Always. Bring coffee. I stared at the forged page. The date, April 16th. That was my birthday. They had done this on my birthday. My name wasn't just erased emotionally. It had been erased legally. Or so they thought. I didn't throw the cookies away. Not yet. I left them on the counter as a reminder of what I gave, of what they took, and of what I was about to take back. Grace sat in her kitchen, the photocopy of the refinancing document spread out in front of her, the ink still smelling faintly like toner. The forged signature stared back at her like a bruise she hadn't realized was there until someone pressed on it. She knew her own handwriting, 68 years of signing forms, checks, birthday cards, and this was not it. She picked up the phone and called Marlene, her oldest friend and former bank notary. Can I stop by tomorrow morning? Grace asked, trying to keep her voice calm. I need a second pair of eyes on something. You sound like you haven't slept in a week, Marlene replied. Come early. I'll make coffee. Grace hung up, placed the papers back in their folder, and walked to the living room where she kept her grandson Ethan's last drawing pinned to the corkboard above the bookshelf. A stick figure holding hands with a smaller one under the words, "Me and Grandma." She touched the paper softly. The next morning, Marlene's kitchen smelled like cinnamon and worn linoleum. Grace laid the documents out carefully on the table. Marlene studied the refinance form, then pulled a file from a drawer containing a notarized mortgage document she'd helped Grace sign years earlier. She compared them side by side. This one's not yours, she said, pointing to the newer signature. It's a lazy forgery. They copied the shape but missed the pressure. Whoever did this rushed it. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she took the paper back. Can you write me a statement saying that? Marlene nodded without hesitation. Yes. But Grace, this isn't just deception. This is fraud. Grace nodded. I know. After she left Marlene's, she drove directly to the legal aid office in town. It was a plain building next to the pharmacy, with a sign that read, "Free consultation Fridays." Inside, a young woman with a tight bun and confident eyes introduced herself as Tara, an attorney who specialized in housing and estate disputes. I believe my name was forged on a refinance document, Grace said simply, laying the folder on the table between them. Tara flipped through the pages, pausing on the side-by-side signature comparison. She whistled low. You have a solid case, she said. This could escalate into a civil suit. At the very least, you can petition the court for a financial audit of the mortgage and reclaim your share, or force the sale. Grace folded her hands on her lap. I'm not trying to take a home away from my grandson. But I'll be damned if I let someone like Amanda steal my name, and push me out like I was never part of this family. Tara nodded. We'll start with a cease and desist letter and prepare the motion. It'll make things official and uncomfortable for them. Back at home, Grace spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through every document, receipt, and text she'd saved over the years. She found a message Amanda sent 2 years ago. Brian says you don't need to come to the signing. It's just paperwork. That message hit differently now. That night, she received a voicemail from Brian. Hey Mom, just checking in. Amanda said you came by, it wasn't a good time. Maybe let's talk next week. She deleted the message without replying. The next morning, she received a knock at the door. A young woman, Ethan's daycare teacher, stood there nervously holding a folded piece of paper. I hope I'm not crossing a line, she said. But Ethan drew this yesterday. I thought you should see it. Grace took the paper. Crayon lines formed a house, 3 stick figures inside, and one standing outside with a sad face. Above it were the words, Grandma outside. Her heart clenched. Thank you, she whispered. After the teacher left, Grace scanned the drawing into her phone and texted it to Brian with no caption. He called within minutes. Ethan said you're too busy to see him, Grace said when she picked up. That's what Amanda told him. Grace's voice turned to steel. She's lying. And if you let her do that, you're as guilty as she is. Brian was silent. Then in a whisper, I'll come by. Tomorrow. Alone. Grace stared at Ethan's drawing long after the call ended. Her eyes burned not with tears but resolve. She taped the picture to the fridge like a declaration. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. The drawing stayed on Grace's fridge like a quiet sentinel, watching her move through the house in the days that followed. Ethan's words, written in blocky crayon letters, "Grandma is outside," had burned themselves into her memory. It wasn't just a picture. It was a map of what had gone wrong, and a reminder of what she still had to fight for. Brian had called, promising to come by alone. That was 3 days ago. Grace didn't chase him. She didn't reach out again. She wasn't going to beg her own son to show up. But on a gray Tuesday morning just before noon, she heard a soft knock on the door. Grace opened it to find Brian standing there, holding 2 coffees. His hair was a mess, eyes bloodshot, but he offered one of the cups with an awkward half-smile. "Thought you might still like hazelnut," he said. She stepped aside and let him in without a word. They sat at the kitchen table. The same one where she used to teach him multiplication tables. The same one where she'd cried after Amanda shut her out on Christmas. Brian looked around like he hadn't really seen the place in years. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said finally, "for letting it get this far. For not stopping her." Grace nodded but said nothing. She'd heard too many apologies that came with excuses. This time she waited. Brian took a breath. "Amanda told me if we didn't refinance we'd lose the house. She said we were behind, and she didn't want to bother you with it." Grace arched a brow. "And that justified forging my signature?" "I didn't know until after," he said quickly, shame washing over his face. "I saw the paperwork later and I just let it go. I told myself it didn't matter if you didn't find out. That if we could catch up, we'd fix it." "You didn't fix it," she said evenly. "You covered for her." He dropped his gaze to the coffee cup in his hand. "I know." Grace got up, walked to the fridge, and tapped the drawing with her finger. "Do you see this?" she asked. "That's what this has cost him. Ethan thinks I'm just someone who shows up at the door and walks away." Brian stared at the picture. His throat bobbed. "He asked me if you still loved him," he said quietly. "Said maybe you got tired of waiting." The words stabbed her deeper than she expected. Grace swallowed hard. "I've never stopped loving him. But I won't stay quiet and watch you two teach him that manipulation and silence are normal." Brian nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, thick, sealed. "Everything Amanda's done. The refinance paperwork, the credit card statements, PayPal accounts, even some messages she sent to her sister. I've been collecting them. I knew this would come back to haunt us." Grace took the envelope without speaking. The weight of it in her hands felt heavier than the paper inside. "I want to make it right," Brian said. "Even if it means testifying. Even if it means losing the house." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment saw the boy he used to be. The one who built pillow forts in the living room and begged for one more bedtime story. "You're already doing the right thing," she said quietly. "And now you have to keep doing it, no matter how ugly it gets." He nodded. "I will." They sat in silence for a few more minutes. Grace broke it with a question that had been sitting in her chest for weeks. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Brian rubbed his face. "Because I was scared. Amanda made it feel like if I pushed back, I'd lose Ethan. And I wasn't strong enough to test that." Grace took a deep breath. "You're testing it now." "I'm not letting her take him," he said, more certain this time. "I'll fight for custody if I have to." She stood, walked over to the cabinet, and pulled down a photo album. Flipping it open, she pointed to a picture. Brian, age 10, holding a science trophy. Face flushed with pride. "You were brave once," she said. "You can be again." He looked at the photo, then at her. "I want Ethan to see that. I want him to be proud of me." Grace smiled. "Then show up. Every day. Not just when it's easy." They stood together at the door when it was time for him to leave. He hugged her tight for the first time in years and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I never gave up," she said. "But I won't let you drag me down with you either. We fight for Ethan now. Together. He nodded and left. Envelope still clutched in her hand. That night, Grace called her attorney Elena and told her about the documents. Elena told her to bring them in immediately. This changes everything, she said. With Brian's testimony, the court will take this seriously. Grace hung up and sat by the fridge, staring at the crayon drawing. Then she pulled down a fresh magnet, grabbed Ethan's envelope, and clipped it next to the picture. It wasn't just evidence. It was the beginning of their comeback. Grace sat at her kitchen table the morning after Amanda's drunken doorstep tirade, slowly stirring cream into her coffee. The mug trembled slightly in her hand, not from fear but from the adrenaline that had yet to leave her system. Amanda's rage hadn't scared her, no. What unsettled her more was how far Amanda was willing to go. The forged documents, the voicemail threat, the unannounced visit. This wasn't just a petty dispute anymore. It was war. But Grace didn't flinch. The next morning, Elena called with an update. The judge had approved a financial review of the mortgage. The house would be evaluated, and pending findings, a forced sale could be triggered. Grace hung up the phone and exhaled deeply. It was happening. Slowly. Legally. Steadily. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grace heard a knock, not the angry pound of Amanda, but a softer, hesitant rap. She opened the door to see Brian holding a grocery bag and a stack of manila folders. His eyes looked clearer. His shoulders weren't slumped. "I stayed at the motel for 3 nights, he said, stepping inside. "I needed time to think." She nodded, motioning toward the table. "I hope you did more than think." "I did," he said, setting down the folders. "These are statements, credit card receipts, transactions from Amanda's hidden accounts. I got into the emails. I printed everything." Grace didn't speak. She simply reached for the first folder and began flipping through. What she found was exactly what she expected, and more. Vacations booked, designer handbags, withdrawals labeled miscellaneous, that totaled thousands. She said it was remodeling, Brian muttered. Turns out it was retail therapy. Grace didn't smirk. This wasn't the time. "And Ethan?" she asked. Brian's voice cracked. "She told him I left because of you, that you were stirring up drama. He asked if you were mad at him." Grace closed her eyes for a moment. The ache that rose in her chest wasn't just anger, it was grief. For the lies. For the damage. For the boycott in the middle. "Did you tell him the truth?" she finally asked. "I said you love him. That you always will. That sometimes adults make mistakes, and now we're fixing them." Grace nodded. "That's a start." They spent the next hour building a plan. Brian would file his own affidavit corroborating Grace's claims. Elena would use his testimony to solidify the case for financial mismanagement. If Amanda wanted to argue innocence, she'd have to do it against a paper trail and her husband's sworn statement. As Brian prepared to leave, Grace handed him a small red gift box. "What's this?" he asked. "Give it to Ethan," she said. "It's just a model rocket kit, but it comes with an open invitation." Brian looked at the box, then at her. "For what?" "To come build it with me. This weekend."
No, Amanda.
"No pressure. Just us." "I'll ask her." "No," Grace interrupted, firm but calm. "You tell her. And if she says no, you bring him anyway. Because this time, Brian, it's not about avoiding conflict. It's about doing what's right." He didn't argue. He just nodded. 2 days later, a small hand knocked on Grace's door. Ethan stood there holding the rocket kit. His jacket zipped wrong and his eyes hopeful. Behind him, Brian waited in the car, watching silently. Grace knelt and opened her arms. Ethan ran into them without hesitation. That night, they launched the rocket in the park across from her apartment. It didn't go far, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in months, Grace saw Ethan laugh. And that was worth more than any house. Grace stood on the porch of her modest, pale green home, watching Ethan chase a ball around the front yard while Brian finished raking the last of the leaves. The autumn wind nipped at her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her focus was on the boy, the lightness in his laugh, the way he darted between trees, free from the storm that had defined their lives for so long. It had been 3 weeks since the court finalized the house sale. Amanda was gone. No more voicemails, no more threats, no more forged documents. Just the quiet work of rebuilding. Inside, Grace's living room had transformed. The once bare walls now held framed pictures of Ethan's drawings. The fridge decorated with magnets and postcards from local museums and libraries. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a sanctuary. Brian had moved into a small apartment nearby. He was seeing a counselor, something Grace had gently encouraged after noticing how hard he tried to bury his guilt. Their relationship was far from healed. But each time he picked up the phone to check in or stopped by without being asked, Grace felt the thaw continuing. That afternoon, as Grace poured 3 mugs of cocoa, Ethan ran inside. Cheeks flushed. "Grandma, I found a snail with a cracked shell. Can we fix it?" Grace chuckled, handing him a warm mug. "We can try, sweetheart. But sometimes broken things need rest more than glue." Ethan's eyes widened, and he nodded solemnly, as if she'd shared the wisdom of the ages. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed and Brian had left, Grace sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through her emails. Among the usual bills and newsletters, one subject line froze her hand. Request for mediation: Whitaker versus Green. Amanda was challenging the trust. She opened the message and skimmed it. Amanda's lawyer was filing for emergency mediation, claiming undue influence and emotional coercion. Grace felt a flicker of rage, not fear, but it faded just as quickly. Amanda might have run out of legal tricks, but she hadn't given up the performance. Grace forwarded the email to Elena with the note, "Let's meet tomorrow. I'm not backing down." The next morning, as Grace walked into Elena's office, the younger woman was already preparing the documents. "She's desperate," Elena said, not looking up. "This is a Hail Mary. No judge will reverse the trust after everything we've presented. Especially not with Ava's statement and the financial evidence." Grace nodded. "So we attend the mediation?" "Yes. And we stay calm. Let her unravel on her own." 2 days later, the mediation was held at a neutral site, beige walls, a silent clock, and a table that felt more like a chessboard. Amanda walked in looking polished but pale. Her eyes darted to Grace, then away. Brian arrived a few minutes later, silent and grim. Amanda's lawyer began with his monologue about misunderstanding, family dynamics, and the emotional toll Grace had allegedly inflicted. Grace let him speak, let Amanda sit tall and unbothered, until Elena placed the stack of documents on the table and said, "We'll let the facts speak." Page by page, the narrative collapsed. The forged signature, the wire transfers, the text messages, Ava's voice recordings. Amanda's confident facade began to crumble, her hands fidgeting under the table. When Elena mentioned Ethan's drawing, entered into the record with a psychologist's affidavit about emotional alienation, Amanda's lip trembled. "Are we really going to drag a 5-year-old into this?" She snapped. "You already did," Grace replied gently, "when you told him I didn't want to see him." Amanda's eyes burned, but she said nothing more. The mediator took a short break to confer with both legal teams. When they returned, she looked directly at Amanda. "Based on the documentation, this trust is sound. Any further legal attempts to overturn it would be dismissed. I recommend you withdraw your motion, Ms. Green." Amanda's lawyer sighed. Amanda didn't speak, just nodded, and stood. "You think you've won?" she said to Grace as she collected her purse. "This isn't over." Grace looked at her steadily. "It is for me." As Amanda walked out, Brian remained seated. "I'll get her to sign the withdrawal," he said. "You won't hear from her again." Grace touched his hand briefly. "It's not about me. It's about Ethan." That weekend, Grace and Ethan planted daffodil bulbs in the front yard. He picked yellow and white ones because those are grandma colors. As they dug into the cold earth, he looked up and said, "You're not going to leave again, right?" Grace paused, setting a bulb in the hole. "No, sweetheart. I never left. Sometimes people try to make others disappear, but we always find our way back." Ethan nodded solemnly and returned to digging. That night, Grace sat by the fire with a book in her lap, not reading, just watching the flames dance. Amanda was gone. Brian was finding his footing. And Ethan was safe, loved, and laughing again. The war was over. Not because there was nothing left to fight, but because she had chosen peace over bitterness, and truth over silence. The doorbell rang. Grace opened it to find Ava standing on the porch, now 15, taller than she remembered, holding a binder. "I wanted to see you," Ava said. "And I brought something for Ethan." Grace stepped aside, heart full.
"Come in, sweetheart.
"You're home." Grace sat at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window, casting a warm glow on the worn wood. She held a letter in her hands, the handwriting unmistakably Amanda's. The envelope had arrived that morning, unceremoniously dropped through the mail slot. Grace hesitated before opening it, her fingers tracing the edges as if trying to glean its contents through touch alone. Inside, the letter was brief. "Grace, I know I've made mistakes. I can't undo the past. But I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. For Ethan's sake, if not for mine. Amanda." Grace read the words twice, then set the letter down. Forgiveness was a complex thing. Not easily granted, especially after the turmoil Amanda had caused. But the mention of Ethan tugged at her heart. Later that day, Brian stopped by to pick up Ethan. Grace handed him the letter without a word. He read it, his expression unreadable. Tiffany Hawk, writing coach +1 Reddit +1. "She's trying," he said finally. Grace nodded. Trying is a start. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Ethan spent weekends with Grace, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They baked cookies, built puzzles, and took long walks in the park. Grace found joy in the simple moments, the laughter of her grandson a balm to her soul. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench watching ducks glide across the pond, Ethan turned to her. "Grandma, can we go to the lighthouse?" Grace smiled. "The one by the coast?" He nodded eagerly. "Daddy said you used to take him there." Memories flooded back, sunny days. The sound of waves crashing against rocks, Brian's laughter echoing as he ran along the shore. "Yes," she said. "We can go." The following weekend, they set out early. The car filled with snacks and anticipation. The drive was long, but Ethan's excitement was infectious. When they arrived, the lighthouse stood tall against the backdrop of the sea. Just as Grace remembered, they climbed the winding staircase to the top, the view breathtaking. Ethan pressed his face against the glass, eyes wide with wonder. "It's so big," he whispered. Grace chuckled. "The world is full of big, beautiful places." They spent the day exploring the coastline, collecting shells and building sandcastles. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, they sat on a blanket watching the waves. "Grandma," Ethan said, "do you think Mommy will come here with us someday?" Grace looked at him, the innocence in his eyes piercing her heart. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said honestly. "But maybe." That night, back at home, Grace sat alone reflecting on the day. The letter from Amanda still lingered in her thoughts. Perhaps it was time to take a step toward healing. She picked up a pen and began to write. "Amanda, thank you for your letter. I appreciate your words and the effort to reach out. For Ethan's sake, I believe it's important for us to find a way to move forward. Perhaps we can meet and talk. Grace." She sealed the envelope and set it aside, a sense of peace washing over her. The path to forgiveness was not easy, but it was a journey worth taking, for Ethan, for Brian, and for herself. As we age, we come to understand that forgiveness is not a weakness. It is a quiet act of strength. Grace's story reminds us that while we cannot control the choices others make, we can choose how we respond. Her path through betrayal, legal struggle, and emotional distance was not about revenge, but restoration. And the most powerful restoration came not through courtroom victories, but through a little,